You are listening to the Football Diehards podcast with your hosts, Justin Lonero and Bob Harris, sponsored by Draftkings. Sign up now using promo code DIEHARDS, DIEHARDS. Make a first-time $5 deposit, and you'll receive a free $3 ticket.
Hello and welcome to the Football Diehards podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lonero, on Twitter, at Justin Lonero. We are Bob Harris-less this afternoon, but he remains in our hearts. I'm with Mr. Kyle Dvorchak, formerly known as FF Kyle the Kid on Twitter. He is now Kyle Tweets Here. Mr. Dvorchak, week one is here. What is good?
Man, it is. It's exciting. It feels like it's been so long since we got to talk about actual, real, non-preseason football. But nonetheless, here we are, and this is a pretty fun slate. Week ones are always weird. We didn't end up getting the Tony Pollard chalk we thought we would. Trying to think of other news that's broken since we last talked. Odell Beckham just coming out earlier today. He's been slowed up by his hip injury, so I'm sure we'll get into that as we talk about receivers. Stefon Diggs on the injury report. It looks like he should maybe play. Jordan Reed in concussion protocol. I'm sure more stuff will come up, but just all the kind of getting used to just the generic injury report stuff now instead of the groundbreaking Andrew Luck type of news that we get. Oh, Antonio Brown, that was another thing that happened. Possibly looking at a suspension for him from the team themselves. That's one we'll just have to keep updated on because that's happening, I don't know, within the past hour or so. That he wasn't with the team today. That's all Mike Mayock had to say about it, and we don't know anything else. So it's still a wild summer, even though the season is seconds from being underway by the time this comes out.
Yeah, I think the AB. I did something on the Instagram today I did an AB post, and it was some of my terminology I was insinuating that it tread lightly in fantasy circles with him, as we knew, and then an hour later it was just he's going to be suspended potentially, and you know something, Kyle, I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if he doesn't play a snap in Oakland. I mean, he's detrimental, is what he is, and when you're trying to groom an organization and become better in a competitive AFC West, I think a guy like that can kind of hinder your progress. So it's a shame because he's coming off a fantastic season. He's AB, right? So we want to see him play, but he has a lot of baggage, and it's steadily getting worse, it would appear, Kyle.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, for sure, until even if we do get news one way or the other, I'm definitely not considering him. He'll be the Monday night 10 o'clock game, so he's not on the main slate, but even if you're playing the small slates, just, I don't know, wipe him off your board for now at least. And I don't know, in terms of season long, I kind of think, I guess if you have other players playing Monday night, because there are two games, it's Houston at New Orleans and Denver going to Oakland. If you have other players on those games, I would certainly reserve one spot for two players there so you're not stuck holding a zero burger from AB if he does end up getting suspended. And we won't, he would be the player we'll know the least about throughout the week because he's the latest, we won't get another game this late until next year. So for me, I have Will Fuller in a lot of teams. I am planning on playing one of Will Fuller or AB, even though that kind of hurts the construction of what my team is supposed to be. I plan on starting both of them. I'm not going to get caught holding the zero. So I think that's how I'll approach this for now. But as always, follow us on Twitter. I'm sure we'll be talking about it. But let's get into the Draftkings slate. We've got the main slate, all of the games up until the 4 o'clock mid-afternoon. Quarterbacks, Justin, who are you looking at for both cash and tournament?
Well, I think, we are in a serious group text, you and a couple other of our friends, and Cam Newton has jumped up at the top. You get the rushing equity from him. He appears to be healthy. We love that. It's a home game against a Ram team that is going to score a lot of points. So Cam Newton tonight feels like the safest play, dollar for dollar, in cash games. We love the weaponry. We've touted Curtis Samuel a ton. We obviously love DJ Moore, but we want to spend less on Curtis Samuel. I think it would behoove everybody to, Christian McCaffrey's naturally jumping out at us. So in my estimation, I will have Cam Newton with McCaffrey, Curtis Samuel, and dirt cheap from a tight end angle. You got to love Greg Olsen being there too. So it's Newton for me. I mean, and again, it's week 1, right? So it's like going into a grocery store while we're hungry. Everything looks good. And, you make an array of lineups and an assortment because the pricing is kind of soft, but we don't know where we're at. I will say this. Carson Wentz is growing on me at the moment. I will go as far as saying that he will finish right around where your boy Patrick Mahomes is at the season end. So I got to love Carson Wentz at home against an awful Redskins team. The spread is large. 5,700 seems just absolutely beautiful for Carson Wentz. I feel safe about Wentz. I feel safe about Cam Newton as well. Now, if I'm going to pay a little more down, I'm going to jump right over your boy Kyler Murray. You can talk about him. We don't know what the Arizona Cardinals are just yet. I guess I'm conservative when it comes to certain players. We figured that out with Patrick Mahomes when he made me look stupid. I'm looking at Kirk Cousins at 5,500 and a potential shootout at Atlanta. I know it's a run-heavy team now. They're going to run the football. We're going to see a ton of Dalvin Cook. Naturally, we're keeping an eye on Stefon Diggs and his injury. But when you look at the Minnesota Vikings, I've talked about Cousins a ton with Bob and yourself. You gravitate towards the talent around Kirk Cousins, and that would be Adam Thielen, who has been overlooked in fantasy circles this offseason. Obviously, Stefon Diggs, Kyle Rudolph, sound running game. So for 5,500, against a Falcon team that can give up points, I am loving Kirk Cousins at his price. And I'll throw one more name at you that I feel relatively safe about, and that will be Nick Foles at 5,300. I think there's a cheap, affordable stack on that side between Foles, D.D. Westbrook, Leonard Fournette. I think there's like a tripod there. We're looking at that game. I'm just having difficulty figuring out where I want to go from a Kansas City Chiefs angle. So Foles, Cousins, Cam Newton, and Carson Wentz tonight. But you can make an argument for a hell of a lot more players than that, Kyle.
Yeah, I think you picked up on almost all the players I wanted to look at. Cam Newton, for me, is like the absolute guy in cash. I think given that every indication is that he's healthy, they've removed him from the injury report. He's no longer got that little Q on his face in DraftKings. So I'm firing up all the Cam Newton, and I think, in cash games, Curtis Samuel is just so cheap. What is he, like 4,200, I believe? It's just the amount of touches you're going to get with Devin Funchess leaving. Yeah, some of those will go to DJ Moore, and I think DJ Moore is probably a better play in tournaments because Curtis Samuel is going to be chalky, but I'm not worried about that in cash games. So yeah, I'm running Cam Newton back with Christian McCaffrey, who will be another chalky back, and with Curtis Samuel. That's sort of like the cash game core team for me. And then on top of that, Wentz just like egregiously mispriced. Like I love playing running quarterbacks, and I wouldn't put him in that stratosphere with like Cam Newton, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. He's got a little bit of rushing equity, averaged about 4 attempts per game over the past 2 years. It's really just his price. The value you're getting him behind guys like Dak Prescott, Phillip Rivers. Both of those like quarterbacks are fine, especially season long, but they're going to be like, I really expect both of them to just kind of run out the second half of the game. Whereas Carson Wentz, I don't know what we could see or expect from these backs. Jordan Howard is like #bad at football, and Miles Sanders is a rookie. They could just throw a lot. And in that case, we get a 2-3 touchdown game. I really just like his floor as a passer. And then Kyler Murray, absolutely a tournament-only play for me because we just don't know what we're going to get. I mean, according to my best ball championship ownership, we're going to get great things from Kyler Murray, but that's another tournament setting. So for cash games, I'm leaving him out. I also think the way Detroit wants to play is that they want to ground and pound. That's why they picked up C.J. Anderson. That's why they drafted Kerryon Johnson. Two guys who are, well, C.J. Anderson's not that good, but Kerryon Johnson, genuinely a good runner, and C.J. Anderson has the perception of being a good runner, especially between the tackles. And then they let Golden Tate go, or I guess they traded him away. And then they're just moving to this boring, run-first, old-school ground-and-pound game under Matt Patricia, and I'm not sure that's conducive to a large, like a safe floor for my fantasy game. So Kyler Murray, I still like him, but only in tournaments now. I've kind of moved off of his great value in cash because I just think the values are better when you go pay a little more for Carson Wentz. And then Nick Foles, the last guy I want to talk about. I just love this game. I believe it's the highest total on the slate at about 51.5. And it's pretty easy to figure out what you want to do on his side of the ball, Nick Foles, and stack him with Dede, and even run it back 3 ways with Leonard Fournette. Like, that feels so clear to me. So for me, that's the quarterback position. Running back, we have some, what looks to be like a top tier of the chalk players with Christian McCaffrey, Nick Chubb is a guy who's getting a lot of buzz, and Dalvin Cook, everyone seems to be on, as well as Leonard Fournette kind of rounding out that tier of guys who I think are going to be pretty popular. What are you doing with these guys? Do you think you could see yourself sneaking Saquon or Ezekiel Elliott in there? Both of those, I think people are a little bit cooler on Saquon than a guy with Christian McCaffrey, for instance, because Christian McCaffrey will get to play in a much higher total, and he won't necessarily be getting crushed the entire game, whereas the Giants are, I want to say, like 7-point dogs. So, what do you do with the top tier of running backs here?
I don't feel it's not necessary to spend on Zeke. He might be on somewhat of a pitch count, which he could exceed 25, 30 DraftKings points. I think there are other players that can do that for a hell of a lot less. And now, naturally, you like Saquon Barkley, but again, 9K, 9,200 for Zeke, it doesn't make sense. I think in cash games, like you mentioned, Christian McCaffrey is that play. And the other side, I think that a discounted Todd Gurley is certainly in play as well. Where Todd Gurley at times has been right around 10K. I mean, you're talking, but I like to use the word ambiguous. It kind of is. I mean, they signed Malcolm Brown in the offseason. They moved up to get Henderson. There's a ton of miles to feed there. They're being cautious with Gurley's knee. So what is his load going to be like, despite the fact that he's in his prime, theoretically? So what Todd Gurley are going to see week one? We know there's going to be some points. Where are they going to come from on the Rams side of the ball? So Gurley seems safe. It is week one. Maybe Sean McVay wants to make a statement, which makes sense, but the offense doesn't necessarily have to run through Todd Gurley anymore. And where Jared Goff used Gurley like Alex Smith used to use Jamal Charles as that blanket, there are a ton of miles to feed him. We like Gerald Everett as a tight end. Obviously, Brandon Cooks, Cooper Kupp is healthy, and Robert Woods. So he's not a necessity. Now, if I go down a little bit, I think Nick Chubb is jumping out at me based on his cost. I think there's some allure there. We were talking about the Browns team before we started recording. I think he's the play, especially with this news about Odell Beckham. Like that a couple days before Sunday at all. I want Chubb. I think he's going to get 20 carries. I think he's going to score a touchdown. He seems like a lock for me. We mentioned Leonard Fournette. I think he's not a necessity either, because if for some reason the Chiefs are killing them, I don't know that Leonard Fournette is going to be relevant. But that being said, Leonard Fournette is one of these backs. If he's healthy, he lives on the field, so there could be a lot of dump offs, and you're paying for volume with Leonard Fournette. I think he can have as many touches as anybody in the NFL by the end of 2019. And obviously, Dalvin Cook. So if I'm going to have a Minnesota Vikings stack, Dalvin Cook is going to be in that stack. Another guy, question marks with his health, but I'm a firm believer in Dalvin Cook. In fact, I think he could finish RB1 or 2. I think Bob Harris would be in agreement with me there. So it's a run-heavy scheme. It's going to go through Dalvin Cook. 6K. I'm going to have Dalvin Cook everywhere. I don't want to miss on him. And in that Jacksonville game, Damian Williams is in that same scope. I'm a little concerned with Shady McCoy there. I do like Darwin Thompson. I want to see more out of Damian Williams, a 27, 28-year-old guy. Not a huge sample on him. And one more guy I will tout, because, again, this is a buffet, and we could go on and on. I could go on and on. For me, is going to be Chris Carson at his price tag. The script seems right at home you have the 12th man in play against a bad Cincinnati Bengals team. They're heavy favorites. I think we know what Chris Carson is at this point in time, despite all the Rashard Penny early offseason touting. Chris Carson is a lock for 20-plus carries. It's Pete Carroll's identity. He loves him. It just seems right there. And between Dalvin Cook, Chris Carson, week one, dollar for dollar, are my favorite plays. And I suppose if I'm going to pay way down, and I listened to your show earlier, by the way, from last night, and I think Chris Thompson makes a little bit of sense in a game where they're probably going to be playing catch up. I'll call him a tournament play, somewhat of a dart. But Chris Thompson, I did something on Road to Wonderworld a couple years ago, a video, and what he was doing on that offense when healthy he's your PPR back that we absolutely crave. He's your James White. This is a guy that could easily have 9-10 receptions in a game where they're playing from behind on the road at Philadelphia, and you're paying what, $3,500? So give me some Chris Carson, and that's where I'm at there.
Yeah, speaking of Roto Underworld.
Chris Thompson, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like Chris Carson too, that was the thing. But speaking of Roto Underworld, a guy who I think people don't respect enough for his pass catching chops, and you brought up Leonard Fournette, John DeFilippo, former Vikings offensive coordinator, got kicked out of there because he passed the ball too much, which makes absolutely no sense given the state of the NFL. But regardless, I like what he can do for this offense, just going from this like ground and pound rush first, rely on our defense approach to a more balanced team. Still have great defense, but like Jacksonville literally showed us you can't win solely relying on your defense. I like the upgrade with Nick Foles, and I think Leonard Fournette is just a good pass catching running back. He's got like right about an 80th percentile of college target share. Like he is a guy who, when given the opportunity, has been a good pass catcher dating back to his time at LSU. They just had TJ Yeldon, who's an exceptional pass catcher, taking away from him, and then obviously who's injured. And in terms of Todd Gurley, I love Christian McCaffrey. He's sort of my cash game lock. I'm paying up for one running back. Like there's a tier of 3 running backs, and then there's a large drop off. Zeke at 92, Saquon at 9K, and 8,800 Christian McCaffrey. Then you have to drop almost 1,000 down to Todd Gurley. So you have this tier of 3 elite cost running backs. And only one of them is in contention for me. It's Christian McCaffrey. I think Zeke's pitch count worries me. They said he's supposed to get 20 to 25 reps. In season long, you're still playing him. He's going to be out there. He'll probably score once. He could go for over 100 yards. But I don't know if I see that ludicrous ceiling that we can get with Christian McCaffrey in such an insane shootout. Saquon Barkley, it's just you're getting a better offense with similar touches in Christian McCaffrey compared to Saquon Barkley. I still like Saquon Barkley, but I think to me it's just save the $200 and get probably a better play in Christian McCaffrey. And then Todd Gurley is the top of the next tier of cost of players, and he's really interesting because I don't know. You compare Todd Gurley to the guys below him: David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb, Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, and even Chris Carson. I would pick probably all those guys I just named to get more touches than Todd Gurley, just because they have shown us time and time again, giving Malcolm Brown that second-round tender, drafting Darrell Henderson, they are not going to commit to Todd Gurley being the Todd Gurley of old. So for me, he is nowhere near my cash game lineups, but I think that for that exact reason, he's going to go well under-owned in tournaments because he still has this crazy touchdown upside. So in tournaments, I can totally see Todd Gurley running it back with maybe a Cam Newton, DJ Moore stack, because I think Moore will be the better tournament play for the receivers on that team. But he's a tournament-only play for me. Then Leonard Fournette, we talked about how much we love. And Dalvin Cook, given how popular, I think he'll probably be the highest-owned running back on the slate just because he's the most egregiously priced running back on this slate. At 6K, he is probably going to outtouch guys like Damian Williams. He's got a much better situation being a home favorite running back as opposed to a guy like Joe Mixon. And the game script should be better than guys like, Nick Chubb or David Johnson. Or I guess just the volume in the game, because I expect Atlanta to come in and be able to put up some points. I don't expect Tennessee to go into Cleveland and put up many points. This game could just not foster a lot of scoring for Nick Chubb. I like his volume. I don't know if I love the overall touchdown output in this game, whereas Dalvin Cook really just exists in that apex of volume. Great game. Still going to be a favorite in this game, so they could still have the chance to run a lot. And then his price 6K. I mean, he and Christian McCaffrey, he's even a better lock than Christian McCaffrey in my eyes, because Christian McCaffrey, could see similar volume, but it's just got 6K is unbelievable. I think that'll be the quickest price to correct. I'll say he'll be over 7K next week easily. That's going to be the quickest price correction we'll see. So for me, those are the plays. And I like running Chris Carson back with Seattle defense. We'll touch on our defense. But that's just a play where there are, I think, 9 or 10 point favorites over the Bengals coming into Seattle, going to the West Coast. Depending on where you look, it's about a 9 or 10 point game. They're going to be annihilating them, and I think Chris Carson is easily going to dominate the touches early in the season, if not throughout the season. So I like that. I think the 10-point spread is pretty fair too. Large spreads are very dangerous because it is hard for teams to cover large spreads. Usually you see a lot of public money on the favorites in those, and it doesn't often pay off. But in this case, I think without A.J. Green, they lost their drafted first-round left tackle Jonah Williams. Their offensive line is 27th based on PFF's preseason ranks, going up against the Seahawks, who just got Clowney. I think they're going to get annihilated. So I think even if the slate didn't have so many good values, I would even be considering Rashad Penny. If this was week 8, give me 12 touches in positive game script of Rashad Penny. But for me, I'm not going to get too cute. I like Chris Carson. Justin, that brings us to wide receivers. I necessarily almost think you are paying down here, but are there any? If there's anybody at the top, who are you looking at? But for me, I'm doing a lot of paying down because I love the running backs on the slate.
Yeah, it's an interesting cast of wide receivers here, and of course with the Beckham news, it's certainly not great. I mean, he's partakes in theatrics as well, so I don't know what to make of it. Some of our colleagues are eager to see him score a touchdown at his maiden voyage in Cleveland. I'm gonna lay off the gas pedal there for now until more news comes out. I do not like Julio Jones, and that's tough to say. He just has not had success. Zimmer has had his way with him over, I think it's a 4-game sample. So I don't feel obligated to pay for Julio Jones, even though he's my favorite wide receiver. I sound like a teenager saying he's my favorite wide receiver, but he is. He's
you got your poster of Julio Jones above your bed,
right, with thumbtacks. Now, Mike Evans is an interesting guy here, and we failed to mention Jameis Winston, Jimmy Garoppolo in that game because that is one of the higher point totals on the main slate, and we have conversed about this game in particular. I think there are numerous ways to go about it, and I certainly it would behoove us to own Mike Evans and have a Mike Evans stack with Jameis Winston. That's the direction that game would appear that it's going. It could be a potential shootout. I think Jameis Winston's one of these guys that it seems like he's always running for his life and always throwing the ball 75 times a game. So I certainly like Mike Evans. Do I feel obligated to pay for Mike Evans a ton? No, but I will have exposure to him. When you go way down, like you said, it's pass happy league now. I was in a season-long draft last night. We went RB heavy, which is not my cup of tea. In hopes that we could land the Godwins and the Boyds and the Cooper Kupps of the world. They suffice. I like Kenny Golladay in tournaments. I think they'll be without Patrick Peterson. I think he could eat in Arizona as a tournament play. I will use some Kenny Golladay. I will also be using Chris Godwin at 6,200. I know our colleague Savvy John Kelly actually pegged the price of Chris Godwin, which is interesting. Bruce Arians said that he could have 100 receptions in the Larry Fitzgerald role. So we love Chris Godwin. I will have more Chris Godwin than I will have Mike Evans for certain, but I will have exposure to both. And again, this is a buffet, so a lot of these players look delicious right now. And Tyler Boyd for me in a script where they're going to be playing catch up. No AJ Green. I think Tyler Boyd is becoming more and more appealing by the moment to football people like ourselves. I think he has a solidified role in that Bengals offense. I love the price. I love the spot. I think they're going to be down. I think he could have 10 targets. And I'll throw, we could go over and over. We mentioned D.D. Westbrook. I think it makes a ton of sense. Leonard Fournette and Nick Foles in a stack there, especially at 4,800. His price will be spiking up as well in the near future. I'll give you one more player. So we're talking about the Falcons-Minnesota Vikings game. I think that's a game to stack. I'm not obligated to pay for Julio Jones. I think that they scheme well for Julio Jones. That being said, I think Calvin Ridley makes a fantastic tournament play on that track with Devontae Freeman, who we failed to mention. I think Devontae Freeman, severely underpriced. We know what his capabilities are. We know that the Atlanta Falcons are going to score points. I think this game could be a shootout. So I do like a Ridley Devontae Freeman stack with Dalvin Cook. I was on Stefon Diggs until I'm reading about Diggs. I like his price. I think he's underpriced. I think you broke out the numbers that this is his year to step it up and kind of overtake Adam Thielen, who doesn't get enough notoriety. But that's where I'm at. I think wide receiver, there's so many different directions to go, as you know, that, where it's Thursday, there's going to be more decisions as there's more revelations. But there are a ton of wide receivers, and obviously Curtis Samuel, I think, for me, because we want exposure to that game, is the play at 4,200.
Yeah, I like a lot of what he said there, and I liked how you mentioned a lot of guys who aren't that expensive, because for paying up for me just isn't really going to happen, except for one, Tyreek Hill, because he has, I believe last year on DK, he had 3 40-point games. No other player had more than 2, and that was like 2 players. It was Michael Thomas and maybe like Juju or something.
Juju, I think it was Juju.
So you're right. It was Juju.
Yep.
And then Cooper had the highest score of any player. So yep. It was 2 players had 2, and then of course Tyreek had 3. Like, that sort of game-breaking upside that happens more for him than it does anybody else is just unbelievable, and in a game that I think could end up shooting out in a sneaky way. I guess not so sneaky because they have a very large total, but when you look at the highest total of the slate, I think this will be relatively low compared to like highest totals of the slate going forward. Like, if Houston versus New Orleans was on the main slate, it would be just bananas, the high ownership you'd see. I don't think we'll see that sort of crazy ownership coming out of guys like Tyreek Hill, like D.D. Westbrook, like Leonard Fournette, even looking down at, Sammy Watkins or McCole Hardman, if that's what you want to go with. So if you want to buy into the highest slate, this is probably one of your best weeks to do so. So for me, Tyreek Hill is the guy there. Stefon Diggs, his splits when he is on the injury report, even when he plays, obviously, are not that good. If he's ruled out, Adam Thielen probably becomes a lock in cash games for me. But if he's not ruled out, I maybe consider Adam Thielen some tournaments and probably just fade Stefon Diggs entirely at this point, because I'm just concerned with, Stefon Diggs. Poor Stefon Diggs really has looked amazing every time he's healthy, and that seems to be less and less often. Looking farther down, Cooper Kupp at 5,700. We'll have to make sure he's healthy. He wasn't on their injury report, the final injury report, or maybe second to final injury report of the week. So it looks like he should be fully cleared to go. So I'm firing up at 5,700 Cooper Kupp. He was scoring touchdowns at an immense rate, and Jared Goff was actually throwing much more efficiently in terms of adjusted yards per attempt and other efficiency metrics when Cooper Kupp was on the field, when targeting Cooper Kupp. So I love Cooper Kupp coming out of the slot, being able to beat up this Panthers defense. Tyler Lockett, like, who else are they going to throw to? DK Metcalf looks like he's going to play, but I don't know what his health will actually be, even if he does manage to get on the field. David Moore, they had to put him... they had to put my dreams to bed because he's out for at least the foreseeable future. They cut Jerron Brown, then re-signed him, so I'm not sure what his status will be for this game. But I think that says what we need to know about Jerron Brown is that they don't really factor him too much into their plans. So for me, it's going to be the Tyler Lockett show. The only problem is he might end up being more of a tournament play just because if they get up early, like, they're going to have no incentive to throw. So for me, I like him to have a chance to score one early touchdown, and I also like running him back with the defense as well because he has been their primary kick and punt returner. But that's more of a high correlation, or like low probability, high payoff thing I'm doing in tournaments, not really cash. And then finally, for me, it's Curtis Samuel. He's just probably going to get the most touches in his price range. Like, anybody below 5K, except maybe D.D. Westbrook, who's another great cash game play. I love pairing D.D. Westbrook with Curtis Samuel, 2 guys who I think are going to well outperform their price this week. And then in tournaments, it's DJ Moore, just because I think the Curtis Samuel hype in season long is overblown. I think a lot of that will carry over to his ownership in week 1. And I think he has a reasonable points per dollar spent of your salary projection, actually a really good points per dollar spent of your salary projection for the week. But I just think DJ Moore is a significantly better player because I think he's one of the best wide receiver prospects to come out in the past few years. So for me, I think DJ Moore is so talented that he could easily outshine Curtis Samuel over the course of the season. And in this game for tournaments, it might start now. So that's what I'm looking at for a receiver. Let's move on to tight end. We've got, obviously, the big 3, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Zach Ertz. Ertz seemingly getting the least love out of all these guys, which makes sense because they expect to be beating up on Washington early and often as large favorites, whereas George Kittle playing in this amazing game. And I forgot we didn't talk about Jameis Winston. The only reason I'm not super high on him, specifically on DK, is because he's the second price quarterback, which isn't bad. I'm just not finding a ton of value there. I could totally see him being the number 1 quarterback on this slate. It's just that I'm already paying up for him like that to be the case. And for me, I think Cam Newton, or looking down at Carson Wentz, Kyler Murray, even Nick Foles, have just better value projections overall. And Jameis is probably going to be pretty chalky. So for me, I like running other players on this team just without Jameis, stacking other gains, than getting a Chris Godwin or getting, a tight end, even an O.J. Howard, a George Kittle on the other side of the ball. What are you doing? Are you going for the big 3, or is there value to be had elsewhere?
I haven't made up my mind on Kelsey yet. I don't want to miss out on him. Obviously, he's a big part of what the Kansas City Chiefs do on offense. And, let me ask you, who do you feel more comfortable with, Travis Kelsey or Tyreek Hill?
Okay, so I guess I will be playing more Tyreek Hill because I think that he has more variance in his projection. I think Kelsey's is much more built on just a floor of targets, whereas Tyreek Hill just needs one catch. He needs one catch. And I also think Tyreek Hill is going to go widely under-owned because all of this Jalen Ramsey is going to shadow him.
Right.
Not nonsense, because he probably will. I just don't think that it's going to make too much of a difference if all it takes is one play for Tyreek Hill, especially when he also has a small amount of rushing equity in any given game. So I think Travis Kelsey, I'll have a decent amount of both of them, but I think I will be overweight more on Tyreek Hill and probably a little underweight on Kelsey, or right around with the field there.
Are you going to use Hill in cash games or tournaments?
No, I don't know if I'd ever. That's absurd. Let's not get crazy here.
All right, okay. All right.
No,
So
I think maybe in a different game, like any time that they play a premier offense, I don't know, if they get Houston this year, or whenever they play the Patriots or even Pittsburgh, those are all games I'd pretty much fire up every single Chief. But this is a game where if Jacksonville, is it possible that Nick Foles is just not good? Absolutely, that's happened so many times in his career. Any time that wasn't with the Eagles, basically. So is it possible that he's just not good and this offense just doesn't get going and it's not really an exciting game? Sure. So I think the downside for the Chiefs is real.
Right. Okay. Well, we mentioned the Niners-Bucks game. So there's some red flags with George Kittle. Too small of a sample with Jimmy G. But if you use Garoppolo and you do stack this game, it just makes too much sense to play George Kittle. He's 6,600. Do I think he's going to have the season he had last year? Absolutely not. Is he a top 5 tight end in the NFL today? He certainly is. Do I feel obligated to spend 6,600? If I'm stacking that game, he's in my stack for sure. I mentioned Carson Wentz. They have an interesting cast of wide receivers in Philadelphia. Who's Alshon Jeffrey? I think Nelson Aguilar is a sneaky play at his price. He's got a role there. Obviously, Deshaun Jackson is there. Zach Ertz, for me, is going to be under-owned in comparison to the other two, meaning Kittle and Travis Kelsey. So I'm going to play Carson Wentz. I'm going to have Zach Ertz at 6,100. We know what Zach Ertz is. I think Carson Wentz loves him. I think it's a great spot for him. In tournaments, I'll be using Zach Ertz. You know how I feel about the position as a whole. Now, the same thing for Kittle goes for O.J. Howard. I think if you have a Winston stack, it makes plenty of sense to play O.J. Howard with Godwin or Mike Evans. So I will have them in tournaments and interchange those stacks, because that's a game that I certainly want to stack. Now, Evan Ingram is jumping out at me, sub 5K. We know what that Giants offense is, and it's not much. I mean, you have Sterling Shepard. We know what he is. We have Saquon Barkley. And then after that, Evan Ingram just jumps out at me as this kind of de facto wide receiver one almost. And that's where his numbers came from a couple of years ago when he was thrust into this role. And it's like, wow, Evan Ingram is. And now, look, I know that he was drafted round 1 with O.J. Howard, David Njoku. He's a solid tight end. Volume opportunity, 4,800, a game where the Giants are going to be playing from behind. I certainly like the volume there. I could see 8 to 10 targets for Evan Ingram. You guys have touted Hunter Henry. I am uncertain on Hunter Henry because I don't know what Hunter Henry is. I get the opportunity aspect of it, where Antonio Gates is finally gone and your boy Tyrell Williams is with the Raiders. But you have Mike Williams who's coming into his own, and you have Keenan Allen, who Phillip Rivers loves in the red zone, and you have Austin Eckler, who's the modern day Danny Woodhead for Phillip Rivers. So you have these other red zone components. The price is alluring for certain. I don't know that I feel obligated to go to Hunter Henry, but you know how I feel about the position as a whole. So I will probably have some Hunter Henry because I don't want to look bad and listen to you guys because we've been talking about Henry for weeks. One more player I will tell you about. Well, I'll give you another tournament play. I think David Njoku, sub 4K, permitting if everything's okay with Odell Beckham, everybody's going to be on him. I want to have a part of that Browns offense. I think it just makes sense to. Week 1 at home, I think he could easily pay off that sub 4K. He's one of these hybrid tight ends that we see, freakishly athletic. Give me some David Njoku in tournaments. I don't think he's going to be owned at all. And I will give you one more player, and that's going to be Greg Olsen. That is going to be Greg Olsen at 3,200. Look, he appears to be healthy. And one thing we know with Greg Olsen, well, first of all, he's been a top 5 tight end over the last 5 years. It wasn't long ago where he was in that Rob Gronkowski, vintage Jimmy Graham, Jordan Reed scope where you had to have Greg Olsen, a model of consistency. And Cam Newton leaned on Greg Olsen for quite a while there as his security blanket. And then all of a sudden the Curtis Samuels come into play and DJ Moore. So I get that. But at 3,200, Greg Olsen historically has been a 5K guy, 5.5K guy at tight end. So you're getting a discount in a game where there's fantasy sexiness all around. I think that Olsen goes under the radar, and you're getting him for a song, Kyle.
Yeah, I like that. I think my tight end pool is going to be a bit smaller because I'm, with relative confidence on who I like here. I'll tell you who Hunter Henry is. He's a guy who's averaged over 9 targets, 9 yards per target throughout his career, nearly 30 games played. Didn't play last season, but really broke out as a rookie, then continued that in his second season. He's a guy who's also caught over 70% of the passes thrown his way and averages a touchdown on a 10% clip of his targets. So I love Hunter Henry at his price, under 4K. I just think the volume per dollar you're spending on your salary is great. Plus, he's a highly efficient guy. I think there are guys where that calculus doesn't make as much sense. The Peyton Barber corollary comes to mind as of last year, where it turns out even if a guy is getting a lot of volume, if he's really just a jag, maybe it's not worth it. I don't think Hunter Henry is that, and I'm pretty confident in saying that. So I like Hunter Henry there. He's kind of my cash game lock. For me, then, I'm a little interested in if you want to run with George Kittle. I think he's going to be one of the top 2 to 3 owned tight ends. So I think a unique way to get equity in this game, which is one of the highest totals on the slate, and get a unique George Kittle lineup in and of itself, is to go George Kittle, OJ Howard. Like the only 2 tight end stack I'm considering on the slate, because I don't think 2 tight end is like a plus EV move. But if you want to get weird, I can totally understand going George Kittle, OJ Howard, and maybe running it back with like Mike Evans and Jameis Winston, or if you want to go the other end, Dante Pettis or Marquise Goodwin and Jimmy Garoppolo, because I think Chris Godwin's going to be easily the chalk, and I think he's a good cash game play. But using O.J. Howard to pivot off of Chris Godwin and then running it back with George Kittle is going to build a really unique lineup. It's something that I'd love to throw a one-off into the Millie Maker with. So I think, I'm not going to run many 2 tight ends, but if I was going to this slate, I really think that's a unique build that could end up paying off. Hunter Henry, those 2 guys. Kelsey, I think you have to have some equity in just because this is a game I think has a chance to absolutely pop off. And then Greg Olsen, you hit the nail on the head with that one. He's just a guy who's been a reliable target for Cam Newton. This game is a great total, and I think this game, of all the high totals, would actually be the one I would feel like it could just crush the over. Both teams hitting like 30-plus points, more so than Jacksonville, Kansas City, right up there with the Jameis Winston, Jimmy Garoppolo showdown. So for me, I like this game. Getting Greg Olsen, he's a guy who I'm going to have in tournaments just because I like Hunter Henry more. He feels much safer. So in cash, that's the go-to for me, and I'm just going to lock that in and forget it. But Greg Olsen, I feel almost, if Hunter Henry wasn't on the slate, he would be my cash game play. So I'm going to have some stake in him in tournaments, and I think he's going to go overlooked. He didn't really play it all last year. So I love that call from you. Let's move on to defense. What are you looking at with defense? Are you willing to pay down? I think there are some interesting spots to pay down at, and then the top-end defenses, as always, have good projections.
I don't know that it's that we're obligated to pay up. It is a position where people tend to pay way down. I certainly don't want to end up with 1 or 0. So I try to play it safe, and I like the Eagles at home. I think that the Eagles can score a touchdown at home. This Washington Redskins offense is probably as bad as we're going to see all year. Right up there with the Miami Dolphins is bad. And they're going to get at Case Keenum, and he is going to make mistakes. So I don't necessarily feel obligated to pay way down. That being said, Something that caught my eye, and I will have some tournament exposure to it. I like the Arizona Cardinals defense as a whole, and I read the other day that Christian Kirk is going to take punts back. I will have I will have a light stack in that game with some exposure to Kenny Golladay, Christian Kirk, and the Arizona Cardinals defense in hopes that Christian Kirk takes one to the house. It just makes sense. It's kind of like you were talking about Tyler Lockett. I don't know if it was yesterday or it was today. Well, it was 5 minutes ago as well, but I remember you saying it yesterday that, that makes sense as well to play Chris Carson with the Seattle defense and Tyler Lockett. It just makes sense. And now the thing about Tyler Lockett is, volume. What type of volume is he going to receive now that Doug Baldwin's out of the equation? He's got that Deshaun Jackson feel to him, but he's certainly Russell Wilson's favorite there. Not to get off track, I mentioned the Seattle Seahawks. I think dollar for dollar, the Seattle Seahawks at home, picking on Andy Dalton, Jadeveon Clowney is there. It seems like the Seahawks just always have a knack to have playmakers on that defensive side of the ball. It's a script where it could probably get ugly, and it could probably get ugly early for the Cincinnati Bengals. And we like that if we're playing the Seattle Seahawks. So for dollar, it is the Seattle Seahawks. I will have some of the Eagles. And that's as cute as I'm going to get in terms of defense. Who are you looking at?
Seattle is the only defense I'm willing to pay up for, but I am more than willing to pay up for them because I think normally, I like right below them the Chargers defense getting Jacoby Brissett going to the West Coast away on his first start in a year. He's not that good anyways, so I think that's good value. But I don't have, I'm not awfully confident in Austin Eckler or Justin Jackson. I don't think either of them are going to dominate the touches enough for me to play them. So there's not really a way for me to feel confident correlating them with their running backs. And I don't know, who, I would assume maybe Travis Benjamin. I'm not playing their punt returner is the point. I don't know who their punt returner is. I'm not playing them. I don't know who they are. There are very few punt returners you actually play. I remember, just the dumbest thing was Antonio Brown returning punts in Pittsburgh. Just the most insane thing. And honestly, I think Tyler Lockett could get into that stratosphere, but they still seem set to doing it. So I like doing Carson, Seattle, and Tyler Lockett. I think it's a unique build. But then the other defenses I'm very interested in paying down for is something in the San Francisco-Tampa Bay game because San Francisco struggled mightily in the preseason. There was the Jimmy Garoppolo 5 picks in 6 drives or whatever training camp news. I don't know how much I buy into that, but I'm not sure how much I buy into Garoppolo as a whole being this great quarterback that learned all of Brady's tips and tricks. So I'm not sure how I feel about that. And I like picking home favorite defenses. Depending on where you look, I think Tampa Bay is actually a pick 'em, but it's a home even defense for Tampa Bay. And then I also like San Francisco's front seven. They have a really talented pass rushing core bolstered by getting Nick Bosa. I think he's got Joey Bosa upside. That obviously has Joey. I mean, they're the same guy. So that's really interesting to me. Yeah, it just makes sense. And also then obviously Jameis Winston, the turnover champion of the NFL, will almost certainly lead the NFL in turnovers if he starts a full 16 games, just given their passing volume. And when you look for high upside defenses, you have to look at games that have high totals because that means more plays are being ran. And more plays being ran is more chances to... It's your carries of your running back to your plays of your defense or your targets of your receiver. You just want more plays being ran. And of course, when those plays are being run by Jameis Winston, all the better. I think we could see easily a pick six, if not, a pick six and a safety or a fumble six or something out of the Tampa Bay or out of the San Francisco defense. So if it was in San Francisco, I would be lock buttoning San Francisco because it's in Tampa Bay, I'm going to have probably equal shares of both them. Any closing thoughts? Because I think that's probably where my defense is going to be mostly owned.
No, I think that, as a whole, there are, it's such a long off season since the DraftKings prices have come out. Of course, DraftKings sponsors this show where we tend to overthink things. And then there's unnecessary plays. I know we have friends and colleagues that have touted Jacoby Brissett week 1, and you try to rationalize that play, but where the pricing is so soft, there's so many different spots where it doesn't make sense to get cute. And I think that this week, defense is one of those spots. So, there are players like the Dalvin Cooks of the world, like the Carson Wentz's. You don't have to get cute. I think when you get too cute, it gets you in trouble, and then the data would corroborate that sentiment. So we're back weekly, which is awesome, and we'll be talking DraftKings prices every single week from here on out, Kyle.
Damn right we will. I'm super excited to get back into it, hit the grind again. Of course, follow us on Twitter to get all of your DFS updates. You know, if I'm already getting questions about the Julio Jones news that he says he doesn't know who he'll be playing. I'd be shocked if he doesn't play. I'm not really concerned about that at all. But we'll be updating all of our followers on that. Find myself at Kyle Tweets here and Justin at Justin Lonero. We'll be joined again by Bob next week, so look forward to that. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.